In this video, we continue with the seemingly endless parade of modifications that need to be made to the forward superstructure of this kit. Today I'm going to be preparing the base or the pedestal for the Mark III gun directors. In the plastic components that come with this kit, there is a simple pedestal that is disconnected from the conning tower platform. This is incorrect. There should be a narrow shelter that connects the base of the pedestal to the conning tower platform. Since this part is not provided with the kit, I will have to scratch build it out of styrene stock. In addition to replacing the pedestal for the Mark III director, I'm also going to be replacing the Mark III director itself. The one that came with the plastic kit is also incorrect. It has this dome cover on it. This should not be present at the stage when hood was sunk. So I bought replacement 3D printed parts from MicroMaster, and I'll be installing those in their place. This means that when I select the styrene stock to scratch build the base of the Mark III director, I need to compare it against the base of the 3D printed part from MicroMaster and not the part that was provided with the kit. That means that the first thing I need to do is remove the Mark III directors from their 3D printed base. This is the first time I've ever removed a MicroMaster part from its printing base. I initially started with an old blade, but I decided that that was probably a bad idea, so I replaced it with a fresh blade. I used the images off of MicroMaster's website to determine which of these structures on the internal of this part need to be removed. It's actually quite easy to tell what is a support and what is detail. The supports are really just very straight, thin pieces of resin, I suppose. For the most part, they fall away very easily when you touch them with a blade, and then using tweezers I'm able to pull them away. Despite the very fine detail in this part, I'm quite impressed by how strong it is, actually. It's surprising me. And this is really easy to actually clean up. Of course I have to be careful, but I thought it would be far more delicate than it actually is. After cleaning up the inside, I then work on removing the part from its base. There are a lot of supports here, and they are more substantial than the ones that are on the inside. That's not really surprising. But I follow the same process, and it works quite well. Just taking it slowly and being careful, and the part comes away rather easily. When I got down to the last few supports, I started to become a little bit concerned. I didn't want to cut the last support and just have the part fall off and, knowing my luck, land upside down and damage some fine detail. So I cut it back and left one support, and then grabbed with tweezers and pulled it off the last support. That worked out rather well, so I cleaned up the support struts and then repeated the process for a second gun director. That has given me quite a lot more confidence with these MicroMaster parts. I suspect I'm going to be using more of them in the future. After the 3D printed Mark III gun directors were removed, I was then able to get a good view at its base, and I can see that its base is quite a lot thicker than the plastic part provided with the kit. Looking at photos, I think the 3D printed part is actually correct. The support pedestal looks very thin in the base kit. Happy with the dimensions for the pedestal on the 3D printed part, I then looked for the appropriate sized tube. 3.2 millimeters was the closest that I could find. After getting the correct diameter for the tube, the problem that remains is to determine how long this tube should be. I figured that the easiest way to do that would be to actually construct these plastic ones from the kit and then use them as a reference to cut out a pedestal to the correct length. To get the height of the director to be correct, I plan to use the arms sticking out the side of the director as the reference point, and then cut the 3.2 millimeter tube such that the arms on the 3D printed gun director sit at the same height. This is quite thick plastic. From my experience with the chopper, something this big doesn't do that well. You'll get a bit of a wavy or bendy cut with the chopper. So instead, I'm going to cut it with a miter and a saw. I think this will give me a better chance of having it cut square. The only difficulty is that it's a bit more complicated to ensure that these parts are the correct length. I don't have the same level of precision with the miter as I do with the chopper. After cutting a section to length, I place the 3D printed gun director on top of it and compare it to the plastic part that was provided with the kit. I think that's about right, so I now need to duplicate the cut. Using the already cut piece as a reference, I then mark off a new section on the tube and saw it to the appropriate length. There is a bit of burring on the part, so a little bit of touch up with a file is required to clean it up. To ensure that the base of these pedestals is correctly located, I want to create a small protrusion into the hole in the deck. Unfortunately, I don't have any plastic stock that is the correct diameter, but I do have this brass tube, so I cut off sections with a Dremel, clean up the edges, insert it into the base of the pedestal, and test its fit in the deck. After a quick test fit, I'm happy with how everything is sitting, so I'll proceed with building the shelters. I've chosen 4.8 by 0.5 millimeter styrene stock to build the screens for these shelters. First, I install the forward screens. These are just going to be a single straight piece, which makes it the easier of the sides to construct. First, I cut sections of 4.8 millimeter styrene stock to length. This is a process of trial and error. Eventually I get it right, and I then apply Revell Contactor Professional to one of the edges. I then place the screen in contact with the support pillar and manipulate it until I get it into the correct position. Once in the correct position, I leave it on the model for the glue to set. While the glue is setting, I'm able to work on the other side of the ship. This is going to be a slow process because I don't want to accidentally move the part while manipulating it, so I do need to wait a while for the glue to dry each time. Now that the glue has set, I can work on constructing the screens for the aft of the shelter. I'm going to start with the smaller section that goes closest to the pedestal. This section needs to have a door on it. This means that I need to ensure that it can fit one of the smaller type of doors that is provided in the photo etch kit that I bought for HMS hood. To ensure that the section will be the correct size, I place the photo etch door over the styrene stock and mark off the dimensions that I need to cut. I then cut the section with the chopper and make a copy of it. Installation proceeds in much the same way as it did for the forward screen. I apply Revell Contactor Professional to one end and place it on the model. In this case, I'm not going to wait a long time for the glue to set. This is because I need to be able to manipulate it when I install the second part of the screen. I want to be able to make adjustments just in case I haven't gotten things quite right. I have estimated the angle that it is at. Once again, through a bit of trial and error, I cut out another section of screen and make a copy of it. And then, following the same process, I apply Revell Contactor Professional to one end and glue it to the first screen. I do let the glue harden for a short amount of time, but not all the way such that I can't manipulate it. I just need it to harden so that there is a bit of structural integrity here. And when it is in that state, I manipulate the screens to get them into the shape that I want them to be in. I then leave these parts to dry for a long time because the next step is going to require a lot more rough handling. Once again, I'm not going to use styrene stock to try and create a section for the roof. I had a lot of questions about why I didn't use styrene stock to create the roof of that box that goes on the radar at the spotting top. In this case, I think it might make a bit more sense to viewers. I'm going to fill this with super glue and let it harden, and that's going to provide a lot more structural integrity. It's going to make these parts far easier to handle, and I won't have to worry about perfectly cutting a roof to fit this shape. Obviously, the super glue will flow and fill into the corners, and then a little bit of putty on the top will allow me to create a nice smooth roof. Using super glue and tape also means that I can be sure that the dimensions of this part will not change and that they will still fit perfectly on the model. Obviously, adding any additional plastic to these components would change its shape. It would make it a little bit bigger. After giving the glue a while to dry and helping it along a bit with super glue accelerator, I file off the excess and then do a test fit. The test fit shows that the parts fit very nicely. To finish it off, I apply plastic putty with a toothpick and then give it a few hours to harden. Once hardened, the excess putty is then filed off. Only a small amount of putty remains, but that's not a problem. All it needs to do is smooth out the surface of the super glue. Now that I'm happy with the shape of these shelters, I can install the photo etch door. I cut them off of the sprue, fold them into position, and then glue them down with extra thin super glue. To attach them to the shelter, first I place a small drop of extra thick super glue onto the shelter and then place the door on top of that drop of superglue. And then I reinforced the perimeter by applying extra thin superglue to the door using a wire. The process is repeated for the other shelter. It's now time to paint these components. As with the rest of the superstructure for HMS hood, I'll be painting this with Tamiya XF53. After spraying the components, I leave them to dry for around an hour before installing them on the model. To install the shelter and pedestal on the model, I apply Revell Contactor Professional to the area using very small drops. Then I place the shelter into its position. Once positioned correctly, I reinforce the bonds with extra thin plastic cement. The process is repeated on the port side of the ship. Despite my best efforts, the joint line is not perfect and it requires a little bit of sanding for me to get it into an acceptable state. To protect the details in the area, I apply masking tape. I then sand the area using a piece of 400 grit sandpaper gripped with tweezers. Once the sanding is complete, I mask off the area and then respray it with XF53. The tape is then removed and I can inspect my work. In the next video, I will continue working on the forward superstructure. There are still a lot of details and modifications that need to be made to this area of the ship. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.